Okay, it says we're streaming live.
I think we are.
I think we are. I hope we are because we're really looking forward to this tonight. We'll get started in just a minute as people are coming into our book club room.
Oh, we are live. I'm looking at
We are indeed live. Wonderful. Well, in that case, I'm going to say good evening and welcome to the 4th Friends in Fiction official book club. I'm Brenda Gardner in South Carolina, and you may notice Michelle Marcus is not here, but she had to step down as co-host due to personal reasons, but we wish her well, and she'll still be active in the book club and on our page. But joining me tonight as new co-host is Lisa Harris in Atlanta. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Patti. Thank you so much. I'm so
We're
excited.
so glad you're here.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
are. So tonight, after much anticipation on our page this month, we're discussing Becoming Mrs. Lewis with New York Times bestselling author Patti Callahan Henry. Patti is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of 15 novels, including our subject tonight, Becoming Mrs. Lewis. She's recipient of the Christie Award with a 2019 Book of the Year, the Harper Lee Distinguished Writer of the Year for 2020, and the Alabama Library Association Book of the Year for 2019. And that was my dog.
Doesn't bother me.
Apologize. She's also hosted the popular 7-part original Behind the Scenes of Becoming Mrs. Lewis podcast series launched in 2019 in October. But of course, we know her as one of the Fab Five, our friends in fiction authors who have rescued us during this pandemic. Welcome tonight, Patti.
Oh, I'm so happy to finally be here. I feel like we've been talking about it, and now it's here. And you just said that I'm part of the Fab Five that rescued you. It's the other way around. Y'all have rescued us. We, the 5 of us, when we first got together to do that, it was to save each other. And I think we have all rescued each other more than one doing the other. Y'all have meant more to us, I think, than we have to you. But anyway, I'm so thrilled to be here, and I can't wait to talk about Mrs. Lewis. And I've seen the most fascinating questions on the page, so I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much. And if my dogs get too boisterous, I'll turn it over to Lisa. But
I don't think any of us mind or care.
Well, it's funny because when Mary Alice was on, she said, well, later today, I'll introduce you to my dogs. And Winston went, ruff, ruff. So she did it right away. But anyway, I wanted to start out by saying, Patti, that I just don't even know what to say about Becoming Mrs. Lewis. It was cerebral, it was ethereal, it was emotional. There were just so many things going on. And the fact that you've provided us with so many research materials and discussion questions that you use is just fabulous. But for those who haven't read it or not read it all the way yet, could you give us a quick summary of the book?
Sure. So that is a really demanding question because me and quick summaries don't usually go together, but I am going to do my very best. So the bottom line is this is the story of a woman named Joy Davidman, who is this fiery intellectual poet, writer, novelist who lived in upstate New York and through this crazy transformational journey became the wife of C.S. Lewis. So it's this very improbable love story about a woman who was born and raised in New York, actually never left New York for all of her life, and except for 6 months when she wrote screenplays in Hollywood, married, 2 kids, an atheist, and then across the ocean, you have C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest Christian apologists of all time, had never left Ireland or England for all of his life, except for the 6 months that he lived, that he fought the war in France for World War I for Britain. And how did these 2 people ever meet, much less become friends, much less fall in love? So that's the question I asked, and that's the story that you read. And it is told entirely from Joy Davidman's point of view. It's told in the first person, from behind her eyes, from behind her heart, because it had never been told that way before.
I'm sorry. And it's such a fabulous telling. I had to mute myself because of the dogs.
Oh,
You know, even though we're in our living rooms, I'm going to pretend we pulled up chairs at the Bird and Baby to have this little chat because
that'd be so nice.
it was so,
so
I'm
nice.
looking at my bulletin board, and on my bulletin board, I have a picture of me at the Bird and Baby.
oh, awesome.
It makes me happy when I'm not in a good mood, so I can look right up, and there I am.
Well, wonderful. Well, we're at the Bird and Baby right now. So
It's a deal. It's called the Rabbit Room where they hung out. So we're in the Rabbit Room.
So I'm going to start out with a question, with an advanced question from the page.
Okay.
I know you've published a timeline for Jack and Joy, and in fact, it's in your expanded edition, but Carol Heitman asks if you would give us a research timeline. How long did it take you to gather so many pieces of the story?
So it was years. And even up until right before it was published, I was still discovering things. And I would text my agent and say, stop, we need to add that he only smoked a burlwood pipe or whatever it might be, because the research for this is endless. And the things that you learn about both of these people are, honest to God, endlessly fascinating. And so I could still be writing this book because there's always something more to learn about them. So as far as timeline goes, I like to explain it best by saying that the first thing I did, that I like to view my historical novels, because I have a couple more coming out, I like to view them as a person. So if you're going to think about a historical novel as a person, I imagine that the skeleton of the story are the facts, and that the skeleton of the person has to be strong. So I had crazy timelines and sticky notes. And so the timeline that you see in the book club kit I made and the one on my website is because I had it in my office to make sure. I had this big piece of butcher block paper, and I had all the big events of each of their lives, because I can't have Joy talk about a book that isn't published yet, of his, etc. So I spent a long time on the skeleton, a couple years, making sure that every bone was right. And then I imagine, if you're thinking about it as a person, the next layer is the skin. And I think about the skin as the emotional truth of the story. And for that, it was all about Joy's writings, because like I mentioned at the beginning, I wrote it in the first person. I wanted to write it from what I call the key of empathy. I wanted to write it from her point of view. I was tired of hearing what other people had to say about her. I wanted to hear what she had to say about herself. So the skin of the story is her poetry, her sonnets, her novels, her essays. And then, so to follow the metaphor to its end, as a person, the last thing I would put on it is clothes. And that would be the imagined things, because we have no idea what they said to each other, or when they professed what, or what kind of party they went to. And yet you can extrapolate it, and it can be inspired by the research you've done. So the research for me was kind of threefold, trying to get the facts, then the emotional truth, and then the imagined parts. And then if we want to talk about research later, we can, but then there was visiting the places, reading her work, and things like that. So.
Wow, it's really apparent in the work that all of that foundation was laid. I love that analogy that you use with the skeleton and the skin and the clothing. That's fabulous.
I had to find a way to kind of break it up, because it gets overwhelming. Like, what do I use? What do I not use? And if I could imagine building it like that, I could kind of get some control of it. Wonderful.
Well, we're so glad you did.
Yeah.
This question is for our readers who are listening to weigh in on the chat box, and I think Patti will be interested in this too. How many of you were familiar with the story of Joy Davidson and C.S. Lewis prior to the book? And if so, did anything change after you read the Key of Empathy? So
yeah. That's a great question, because most people are, and I can't wait to hear the answers, but most people, the way they're familiar with her is one of two ways. They have either read A Grief Observed, which is the book he wrote about her when she died. It's back here. And then the movie Shadowlands with Deborah Winger and Anthony Hopkins.
Fabulous. We're going to, in just a few moments, get some information from the chat from Lisa, if you have anything yet.
Well, the comments are coming through, but there is one comment that I wanted to share from Carrie Miranda. She said, "This is one of the most moving books I have ever read. It's written so beautifully and I love it so much. My sister wrote to you, Patti, and you were gracious enough to send a signed copy. It's a treasured possession. Thank you so much for writing this story."
Oh, that means so
I
much.
thought that was so sweet. I was like, I have to share.
That means so much to me. And I'm not being, humble. Well, I am, but I'm not, it's joy, right? Like, this is her story. I was privileged and honored that I got to tell it. And when I decided to tell it, I was stunned that nobody had done it. I couldn't, there's biographies about her. And like I said, there's the movie Shadowlands. But Shadowlands is all about Lewis and how her death affected him. And if anybody's touched by the story, it's because of her. My favorite quote by Joy Davidman is, "If we should ever grow brave, what on earth would become of us?"
Wow.
If we should ever grow brave, what on earth would become of us? And when I read it, it was in an essay, and I rushed through the essay to find the answer, and she didn't answer in the essay, and I was kind of mad. But I realized it's because she answered with her life. So that really sweet comment is because Joy answered that bravery question with her life. I was just privileged to get to tell it. So thank you. That means a lot to me.
Oh, thank you. Now, to answer the question, the majority of the people in the chat box have said that they had no idea about the story.
Really?
Jim Stiskowski said, "I was familiar from the movie Shadowlands."
Yeah.
But everyone's like, Amy Durkin said, "I was not familiar, but I now want to read her sonnets." I agree. I want to read her sonnets too.
Yeah, I have all her books of poetry right here. You guys need to buy them. It might be tagged a little bit, but yeah, her sonnets are amazing. It's called A Naked Tree, Love Sonnets to C.S. Lewis. So it's amazing.
Oh, we'll have to post that later to.
Okay, I will.
Everyone. Yeah, that sounds. Any more, Lisa?
Nope. Everyone's like, "No, I had no idea. Was not."
Oh, wow.
At all.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
it's fascinating. Yeah.
It is. It was truly fascinating.
Because I always knew about it. But I also was a big C.S. Lewis reader. So especially because I read A Grief Observed. So I did know about it. I just didn't know what I found out. So yeah, that's fascinating.
Wow, that's amazing. There's another question in advance. A lot of the questions in advance were really about the history and the research of the real people, but Molly Neville wrote, "I know from the author's notes plus expanded section that the letters were from your imagination," and you mentioned that earlier, but you also consulted with Douglas.
Yeah.
Did you review the letters with him during the writing? Did it sound like what his mom and Jack would have written? What was his thoughts?
So this is interesting. So Douglas is, for those of you who don't know, Douglas is Joy's son. Joy had two sons, Davy and Douglas. And I know when I was scrolling through book club, a lot of people want to know what happened to them. So I can answer this at the same time. But Davy passed away, I think it's been about 7 or 8 years now. But Douglas is alive and well and helps run the C.S. Lewis Company. He is in charge of all things C.S. Lewis. He is very involved. He lives in Malta. So it's not like I can stop by and have a cup of tea with him. But we have met in person, and that's a really interesting story if y'all want to talk about that later. But I didn't meet Douglas until the book was done. So I made a decision really early on not to contact the family until I needed to. And actually, he found me before I could get to him. And so, because he heard about it. So we have become very dear friends, and he loves everything about the book, or so he tells me. And he has said, even when he doesn't think I'm listening, he has said that how much the book means to him and that it's very emotionally true. But I didn't consult with him on the letters or really on anything. After I met him, and he told me a couple of the things that he thought were interesting. I did put a couple things in the book, but it was essentially done and sold when I met him. So there were some post things I put in, but I didn't consult with him on the letters at all. And he didn't complain about them. So
I think that's a good sign.
yeah. That must be okay. And listen, those letters, even though they're imagined, they are completely built and predicated on the letters that they did write to other people, right? So both of their letters from that time are published. Both of them have huge volumes of published letters during those years. So I know what they were talking about. I know what they were thinking about. I know what they were concerned about. I know the advice C.S. Lewis was giving to other people. So when I say they were imagined, I kind of prefer, I should have used the word inspired. They were more inspired by the letters they had written to other people. They weren't just made up out of thin air. So.
Right, that makes sense. And it's obvious that a lot of work, went into that to make them feel like, yes, very
well, to get the rhythm of their voice, and you're never going to get it exactly right, especially Lewis. I know Joy's voice really well. I have a harder time. Lewis has a very succinct style. He's very clear while being so cerebral that you're just kind of like, so it's a little harder to get his voice. She has a more, I understood the rhythm of her voice a little bit better because I read so much of her writing.
Great. I'm going to change the direction a little bit here because I want to get some more readers talking about this question. Patti, one of your questions in the discussion section is about the 3-year pen friendship that Joy and Jack had before they met in person in England. For our book club members, do you think friendships can begin with words and notes and letters? And this is for Patti and the readers. Have you ever started a friendship that way? And if so, how has it affected your life?
Oh, wow. I think I'm just of the generation that we just letters. No. I mean, I wrote a lot more letters when I was in college. I wrote to friends I didn't want to lose touch with, but I've never forged a friendship through letters. I've kept up a friendship through letters, but I don't think I've ever forged or started a friendship through letters. That's a fascinating question. I think that it's a lost art. I think that I wish that would have happened. We email, and there's lots of people, especially during COVID, that, the primary way I can keep up with them is by emails and texts, but that doesn't count. That's not letters.
Well, and I do wonder, like 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what will we do? What will someone like you do to write a book like you wrote? There won't be the same trail.
No.
And I think we're losing something with that.
Oh, we're losing so much with that. I think we're losing the ability to communicate beyond like XO, emoji, hope you're having a great day, thinking of you. The actual physical act of taking out a piece of paper, starting to write is completely different than a whole bunch of emails. So, yeah.
I love handwritten letters. I still buy stationery and try to write letters to my friends if they're sick instead of just a card. But I think that's something coming out of COVID that people are starting to do more. I know there was an assisted living home, I think it was in North Carolina, of people that were quarantined, you could send cards and handwritten letters to these older people that couldn't leave. And I thought that was so sweet. I think people should start to write letters again and love letters. I think that's something that we're missing.
And I think too, gosh, Lisa, you're so right. It's making me think of all these people I should write letters to. There's also something about, I really believe in the proprioceptive hand to paper. I'm a big Artist's Way devotee, and her big thing, Julia Cameron in the Artist's Way, is morning pages, pen to paper, to process things with your hand to the pen to the paper, not just typing. And I really believe that probably letters written that way, while Joy was sitting there trying to express her concerns and her feelings and her wonderings, were probably so deep compared to a quick email we can send. And the answers he gave her, he spent hours, C.S. Lewis spent hours every morning answering his mail. I think he got something like 40 letters a day or something. So, you know, that's a lot different than shooting off an email.
Absolutely. Lisa, what other comments do we have about handwritten letters?
Brett Casanova-Rini said that I wrote to someone in the military that was in Afghanistan 20 years ago, and we were friends for a few years from that.
Oh, I love
And Carrie Miranda said, not the same, but my students write letters to Operation Gratitude every year. And they say that the servicemen and women who get them like the letters best of all the items, like care packages and things that they receive.
I bet.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
Well, maybe.
And Barbara says, yes, I sent letters to some of the residents at the North Carolina nursing home in hopes of getting some to write back. They have gotten more than they could handle. So Barbara wrote to the same place I did.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to kind of shift the discussion again too, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask
you wherever you want to.
Okay, we're just gonna.
I'm following you.
Meander around.
Yeah.
Going back to Jack and Joy's relationship, from what you know of doing the research, it seems that Jack's friends didn't necessarily approve of her. Do you think that's true? And that's for the readers too. And why do you think so?
So there's, in the beginning, no. I mean, from all accounts, in the beginning, the Oxford set did not ken to Joy Davidman. So I want you to imagine that it's 1952 and it's Oxford, England, and it's Oxford University that is an entirely male dominated. They have a couple female colleges, but not many. And this woman from New York with a New York accent comes busting in and is completely forward and will talk about anything and can outwit and out argue and out debate and probably out drink most of the men while their wives are at home cooking dinner. So there was a bit of a who is she and who does she think she is kind of thing. But honestly, in the end, they had really close friendships in Oxford. And she writes a lot, you know, we don't see in the book, not to give too much away, but we don't see the last 3 years of their marriage in the book. And I summarize it, but it's been written about so much. I keep threatening to write a book called The Married Years, but they had
what?
The Married Years.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first.
Exclusive.
But they had, they had dinner parties and they traveled with friends and they had this really active, amazing social life. So in the end, yes, they had a lot of very close friends in Oxford. But in the beginning, and especially with one of Jack's dearest friends, who was J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote, The Hobbit. and Lord of the Rings, and he definitely had a hard time with joy. And that's usually the person people want to ask about the most. Like, why did Tolkien have such a hard time with joy? And, we can only guess because he doesn't really say, and Lewis never really said. There is a letter where Tolkien called it a strange marriage. I think but I think the biggest problem for him, if I get to guess as at pretending I'm joy,
Absolutely, you do.
yes, is that channeling joy is honestly, Tolkien was a very, very, very staunch Catholic. And he was very much a traditionalist. And Joy was a divorced woman from New York with 2 children. And that is not what Tolkien imagined for himself or for his friend. And so I'm not sure it had so much to do with Joy as herself as it had to do with the idea of who Joy was. And Douglas, her son, tells this beautiful story about how when C.S. Lewis was dying, and Lewis died 3 years after Joy died, and that when Lewis was dying, Douglas went to see him in the hospital. And when he came out, Tolkien was walking in. And Tolkien said, "Hi, Douglas, I'm Ronnie Tolkien." And Douglas was like, "Yeah, I know who you are." And he said, "I need you to know that if something happens to Jack, you can come live with us." And that was just kind and wonderful. So it's not like Tolkien hated her or anything, but I do think that she was the opposite of the kind of woman he would have chosen for his dear friend.
Absolutely. It's funny when I read it, I don't hear the accent, but I'm sure that it would have been very it would have very much stood out. And
Oh, yes.
In addition to her background, because even though she's a real person, she really made me think of Laura Lyons in The Lions of Fifth Avenue.
Yes.
Because
Me too.
I can't wait to tell
Really?
Christina that. I can't wait. Okay. I agree with you.
I totally thought the same thing. That is so funny that you said
there were
that.
just so many similarities in the time period and the restrictions that they were kind of bucking against.
And telling them what they could and couldn't do and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lisa, did we have any comments on the
We
chat
have
box?
quite a few questions. We have quite a few questions, but I want to go ahead and give the spoiler warning. It's now 7:28. So from this point forward, some of the questions might contain spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, you're welcome to stay on. But if you want to, dip off, that's okay. But we are going to discuss some of the spoiler things moving forward. But this question is not a spoiler, so you have to.
But don't leave.
Don't leave. We don't want you to leave.
No, just mute for those moments.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
See, that's what you just mute us. You can still see Patty's beautiful face.
Oh, I don't know about that. You can still see all my books.
Okay, Nancy Maestra says, question for Patti. What had to go? Like, what were some things that you couldn't include in the book but wanted to, so that you could keep the book at an appropriate length and still keep readers engaged?
Oh, that's a great question. And that was really hard with this book because they are, like I said, endlessly fascinating. And I could have written a trilogy. I mean, easy. I could have written a trilogy, but you do not want to wait 10 books to see them kiss. So I felt like I had to pick what I called a touchstone. I had to pick an end stone, a capstone, and say, if it doesn't have to do with this, it has to go, whatever this would be. And for me in this book, the touchstone was, if it didn't have anything to do with their love story or her transformational journey that led her to him, it was going to have to go. And that was really hard. I mean, one of the things I really wanted to dive into a lot deeper, well, there were a lot, but you asked one of them, and that was her years in Hollywood. She spent 6 months writing screenplays in Hollywood. And it really changed who she was and how she felt about New York and coming home. I really would have liked to have gotten a lot more into Bill and Joy's early years when they were in love, because we meet them when they're falling apart. But when they were very active in the New York social scene and they were both very famous writers, Joy was a genius, and she had won the Yale Younger Poets Award. She'd won the Russell Lyons Short Story Award. She had a novel in her 20s. She was a MacDowell Artist Colony protege. All of that was so interesting to me. But we have to meet her when the change is starting. I can't give you 400 pages of backstory. You have to meet her when her life is about to change. And so that is a hard decision. And there were so many things about him I wish I could have included, especially in the years that after they were married and in love. That's not a spoiler. She becomes Mrs. Lewis, not a big spoiler there. But there was so much about their life, and I mean, my favorite chapter was cut. It's on my website, but it's, we call it killing your darlings. If it doesn't serve the story, it has to go. And that was hard. It was hard. There was a lot I wanted to put in there, especially about her poetry and her awards and her grad school and being a child, her childhood. Oof, it's amazing. Yeah. So.
Wow.
Those would be tough decisions.
Yeah.
They were. You should have seen my sticky pile, little notes. Like I'd have a scene idea and I'd be like, oh, I can't use it.
Oh, that would be so hard.
So.
Well, we've got a question from Michelle Marcus, who we love.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. How did you interpret her actual history in this story? Meaning, what things were added, inspired by her actual life?
Say it again.
How did you interpret her actual history in this story? Meaning, what things were added, inspired by her actual life?
Oh, probably what you mean is like, what did I make up and what was actually inspired by her life? Joy has, when I did my research, Joy has an immense amount of published and unpublished letters. So I read not all, nobody can read all unless they spend their life studying Joy, but I read the majority of her published and unpublished letters that are kept at a place called the Wade Center at Wheaton College in Illinois. And I really didn't make up any events because the events of their life are very well documented. It's not like writing. So my new book is set in 1838. It is a lot hard, or part of it is set in 1838. There are not records the way there are for Joy. So I would read a letter, and for example, when she received the letter from Bill in England, and that devastating letter that I'm not going to say what was in it, and she wrote a letter to somebody else about how she walked London, how she went to Westminster, how she went to the Whispering Gallery in St. Paul's. And it was probably only 2 sentences in that letter, but I expanded that into 2 chapters because I wanted to show her walking around London, show what she would have seen, show the Tower of London, show her rising up, and not just telling you, but showing you. And so almost all of the events, I'm trying to think of one that isn't, are actual events that happened that I just expanded and kind of blew up. Her moving Lewis into his offices in Cambridge. She really did that. Whether they did that game of site memorization, who knows? But I took the true event and then I added what would have been likely. And even if it wasn't done there, it was probably done somewhere else. So Michelle, I think, rarely, and I can't think of one right now, are the events completely made up. because their life is very chronicled. There's actually a website where you can see, somebody has chronicled everything C.S. Lewis did every day of his life, literally.
Wow.
So there was no doubt where they were and what they were doing. So that part wasn't imagined, but what they said and how they felt, that had to be imagined.
Gotcha.
Great question.
Wow. I know, that was great. Jan would like to know how you selected the cover of the book.
Oh, that's a fun question because, yeah, it's right there.
We've got Vanna Brenda.
There you go. I don't. So the book is published by HarperCollins, Thomas Nelson, and they have an incredible art department. But the reason this is such a great question is because it has a fun story behind it. So I was with one of my very dearest friends. Her name is Sandy Oliver Barkowski, and she's a photographer. And I was with her when they were sending me covers. Like, do you like this one? 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 And that actually is the combination of two different covers. So there was a cover of her walking down. It was more like a garden path, like Addison's walk in the book, because you read about that walk in the book. And then there was another cover with the background of Oxford. And I said, combine them. And they did. And that's the cover we got. And then I said, I really want to see some gates. And they added some gates. So, I know I had a lot more to do with this cover than I usually do, but there's such an incredible art department and the basics already existed. So I didn't do the art or pick the woman or anything like that. I just said, tweak this, tweak that. Tweak this.
Oh, well, it turned
Beautiful.
out fabulous.
I love the hat tilt in the back. It's like the perfect hat tilt.
Jaunty.
I love it.
It's very jaunty.
Yes.
Exactly.
Just like Joy.
Perfect.
And she
Lisa,
looks so purposeful. Like, I am going there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Joy probably would have done. In fact, I think if I could, they were flying by because so many people are commenting, but I think that I'm going to say this accurately. Marilyn Rump asked about whether Patti feels that Joy is a role model for women today.
Yes.
That was a short answer.
Unequivocal yes. I actually have a talk I give where I list the ways in which she is a role model. But the first one I always say is that we might not all need to pack up our kids and move to England, but that we might, like Joy did, need to pack up everybody's expectations and definitions of us and society's demands and people telling us who and what we should be that aren't of our true self. And I think that she is a great example of self. There's a great Mary Oliver poem called The Journey. It's one of my favorite poems. And one of the last lines in it is that she saved the only life she could save, her own and herself. And so I think that's what Joy shows us, is that on some level, the only life you can really save is your own. And she made a lot of really controversial decisions. And I don't even agree with all of them. I'm not holding her up as some kind of saint. There were decisions she made that I went, oh my God, no. Like I was like looking out of the side of my eye, like, do I have to write about that? And she was like, yes, you do. You can't leave out the bad parts. You got to put in all the stuff. So trust me, I get the letters. I can't believe she did this or did that. And I can't either. But I know that Joy did the best she knew how for herself and for her boys, for sure.
Very cool. Did you have another question, Brenda, or do you want me to pull some more?
Why don't you pull some more? My dogs are having a race through the house right at the moment.
Okay. Barbara Smith would like to, well, she says that she's always been a C.S. Lewis fan, and she would like to know more about Joy's life with Lewis and how they handled the difficulties with her younger son.
I don't know. I mean, I hate saying that, but neither one of them really wrote about that. And what Lisa's talking about is that Douglas has come out in the past few years and said that Davy was quite possibly bipolar and very difficult. And that he caused a lot of problems. Davy actually took off right after Joy died. He left England. Douglas grew up in the kilns with C.S. Lewis and Warney for those 3 years without Davy. So he left. But there are a couple letters in which Lewis talks about how rambunctious Davy is, but Joy doesn't talk about it that much in her letters. And Douglas is kind of the primary source we have telling us how difficult those days were. But everybody from Walter Hooper, who is a Lewis scholar and is still alive in his 90s, and Douglas and anybody who's ever read their papers will say that Lewis was an extraordinary stepfather. So I do know that he was as involved as he could be and that he was an extraordinary stepdad. They only saw their father one more time after they left America. Bill didn't ever come visit until Joy had died. And then they only saw him once. And then I know this question's going to come up. And then Bill actually did end up taking his own life. Bill took his own life about 2 years after Joy passed. So yeah.
That was my next question. So that was perfect.
I read your mind, Lisa.
Yeah.
I think you got it. I think you got it.
We got something going on here. Yeah.
Well, Patti, I'm curious about something too. And for our readers, what scene in the book resonated the most with you? And for Patti, what was the most difficult scene to write? I know you mentioned there was a lot you had to leave out, but of what's in the book, what was the most difficult for you to write?
Wow, okay. I'll tell you this story. So, I mean, it was definitely when she fell and was diagnosed with terminal cancer and was in the hospital. That was really hard for me to write for a couple reasons. One, I've had breast cancer, and that is the cancer that killed her. And for her, it was an undiagnosed breast cancer. So she didn't know, she knew she had a lump, and she kept telling the doctors, and they kept ignoring it or telling her that it was just a cyst. And so she didn't realize she had metastatic breast cancer until she broke her leg. And that's the scene in the book where she falls, she breaks her leg, she ends up in the hospital, and she finds out she has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And that was really hard to write. And part of that is, and that's part of in my list of lessons from Joy, which is in the medical world, to be an advocate for yourself, to not just accept answers, because if she would have just pushed a little harder and said, no, you know what, I think I'll get an x-ray of that cyst, would she have still died from breast cancer? I don't know. It's 1952, 1953, 1954. So she died in 1960. But all that while it was growing in her. So that was a really hard scene to write. And my son is now a senior in college, but my youngest, but when I was writing that scene, he was a senior in high school. And I was sitting here in my office, and on the other side of this wall is a living room with this big table where my kids always did their homework. And he was out there doing his homework, and he heard me crying, and he banged on the wall. He said, "Are you okay in there?" And I was like, I'm fine. But I wept through that scene. That was a really hard scene to write. So nobody's ever asked me that. That's the first time I've told that story. That's fun.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
it was difficult to read too. I imagine there's
was.
some comments that Lisa is going to tell us about that are the same.
Yes. Harriet says she cried buckets when reading that.
Yeah.
And Annie said, I was just going to say that the fall and diagnosis was the hardest for her to read.
Yep.
And then Paulette has a comment. She says, Patti, you won me over with this book in the prologue when Joy, as a child, snuck out of the house and took her little brother and went to the Bronx Zoo in the middle of the night, and how Joy connected with the lions.
So all of that is true. And I love telling that because it's true. And one of my favorite parts or connections that I found when I was doing my research was that Joy was obsessed with lions for all her life. And then who bounds on the scene? Aslan in Narnia. So, and it's part of what had to get cut, but Joy also helped raise the MGM baby lion Leo when she was in Hollywood. So
Really?
yes. And so she was so miserable in Hollywood. She says it was the worst 6 months of her life. And she said she rushed back kissing subways and skyscrapers to get back to New York. But yeah, she helped raise Leo the lion in Hollywood. And so she had all these little connections with lions through her life. And when I realized that, I wanted to show it right up front in the prologue. And it is true. Her and her brother used to sneak out at night, go to the Bronx Zoo, and feed the lion through the cage bars.
That's so cool.
That is really cool. But one of the things that was, it wasn't a main theme in the book, but one of the things that stood out to me was her early years, her childhood, when the description of her bringing the report card home and the reaction of her father. And that just, even though, that was early on and just sort of a preview, but I thought, oh my goodness,
her family was very strict. I explain it by trying to give some grace to them by saying, her family were immigrants. They lived in a part of New York called the Jewish ghetto, and her parents were Middle European, Eastern European, and they came over, Russia and Polish. And the only goal when you were immigrants in New York in the 20s and 30s was assimilation and accomplishment. And they knew that Joy was a genius very early on, and they pushed her really, really hard. And the reason they pushed her was so they could all have a better life, but it was still really cruel.
What were some of our other reactions from readers, Lisa? Were there other comments about passages in the book? She is our rock star with the...
I have a question. It kind of goes along with Hollywood. If Becoming Mrs. Lewis was going to be a movie, who would you cast as Jack and Joy?
I know who I would cast. So, I have two people I would love to see play Joy. One is Claire Foy. You know who Claire Foy is?
Oh, yes. From Outlander?
No. That's real Claire. I don't know what that actress's name. No, Claire Foy played the Queen in The Crown.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Okay.
She's really cool. And I love Ruth Wilson. Do you know who Ruth Wilson is?
Oh, yes. I love Ruth Wilson.
Amazing. I don't know if I've ever, and she looks a little bit like Joy with those big round eyes. And, but Ruth Wilson has this incredible ability to look vulnerable and tough at the same time. So Ruth Wilson has been in a lot of stuff, but a lot of BBC things, but she was also in that show, The Affair, and Luther. And she was in a BBC series called Mrs. Wilson, true story about her grandmother. And then who would be Jack? Let's ask our readers who they see. How about?
Yeah. Let us know in the comments. I was thinking about that, like who would be a good Jack?
I think I like Colin Firth.
And I'm terrible at this. I'm terrible at casting actors because I don't know so many of them, but I bet our book club members are going to have some.
Yeah, I bet they'll have some
suggestions.
Sue agrees and says Claire Foy. She's 100% on board with that. Paulette agrees that Ruth and Claire would be great.
Maybe they could call them. I don't know. Just give them a ring.
And Lori says Katrina. Oh, she was telling me the name of the person in Outlander. Thank you.
Oh,
Sorry. Liam Neeson for Jack, maybe.
ooh, I like that.
That's what
Give him a
Marlene
call, Patti.
Marlene said.
That's
Liam
a good
Neeson.
one.
That's
I'll
a
just
good one.
email him. Just see what he's up to.
I think that would be good. And we've got another Liam Neeson
Okay.
Two votes
from
for
Kathy
Liam.
Stepp, and Michelle Knapp says Colin Firth. It's a good one.
Very interesting to see how people
Yeah.
see people. But I mean, it's really hard because Anthony Hopkins was so good as C.S. Lewis. He really
Well,
is in Shadowland.
that just, as soon as you said that, that was one that just popped up.
Mhm.
Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, he already did. I don't think he's Anthony
Mhm.
might be a little too old to play a 50-year-old lately.
Yeah, maybe the older years.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We'll have to see.
Oh, we've got Mary
So
says
there's an
George
actor.
Clooney, and Barbara says Tom Hanks. And
Tom
Mary said George
Hanks.
Clooney. So
George is a
couple.
little too handsome to play C.S. Lewis.
Yes, poll going up tonight on the Friends in Fiction Book Club page.
I know. Let's do it. Let's get our 2,000 plus members voting in on this, and then we'll call Tom Hanks.
That's right. Tell him he's been called up.
Yeah.
I have just a quick question, Patti, for you. Sort of more of a general question. Of course, Becoming Mrs. Lewis is a historical work. You've also done contemporary fiction. Do you have a favorite, or is it like children? You really can't say one way or another.
You know, they're not like children, but because they don't make me cook them dinner, but I love them for different reasons, if that makes sense. So there's not one I love best, but I mean, I love Mrs. Lewis because she changed my life. She changed the trajectory of what I'm writing about, because now I write historicals. Meeting her changed me. So of course that's up there, but I love all of them. I wouldn't have written my books if I didn't love them. So I love Losing the Moon because it's the book that got me published. I love Between the Tides because it's the first book I wrote. I love The Favorite Daughter because I got to talk about memory and Alzheimer's and family and that kind of thing. So, and I love the book coming out next year because it was so all encompassing, and it has to do with the land and the landscape that I love so much in Savannah and Bluffton. So I love them for different reasons is probably the best answer.
Well, I'm glad you brought up those previous works and a little bit about them, because we'll certainly have one of them at a future book club session. So that gives us
to go which one. Yeah.
Oh, that will be tough. That will be tough. Well, I think that it's our time is almost up. I can hardly believe it.
No way. Okay.
I know, but I think Lisa has a question for you that you just alluded to.
Yes, perfect timing. Before we go, can you give us a little snippet about Surviving Savannah?
Oh, yes, I can. Once again, little snippets aren't my forte, but so here she is. This is the advanced reader copy. She comes out on March 9th, which, believe it or not, sounds a million years away and is like 4.5 months away. So we're gearing up, but it is the story of a true and lost to time steam shipwreck that happened in 1838, carrying all the elite of Savannah and Charleston. And I follow one family, and it is a father who was a financier for the ship, and his 6 children, his wife, his sister, and his niece. And they boarded that ship to sail north to Baltimore for the summer. And the ship blew up off the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina. And I tell this story from the women's points of view, because every shipwreck story I've read or most of the shipwreck stories I've read are adventure stories with the captain and the men. And I tell it, it's a story of survival. The overarching theme that I went into this book with was, how do we survive the surviving? And who knew how timely that would be in this day and age? How do we live through something that tragic? Some of the survivors floated at sea for 5 days and 5 nights. How do we live through something that tragic? How do we survive the surviving? And one of the most fascinating, well, loads of fascinating things have happened, and I'll be sharing it all over the next 4.5 months. But I was about 3 weeks into writing this story and trying to figure out how I wanted to tell it and what was the door into the story, when I hit upon a headline that said, "Steamship Pulaski found 100 feet deep, 30 miles off the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina." And a shipwreck crew had been hunting for it because there was so much gold and silver and artifacts on it.
Mm.
And so the entire time I was writing the book, I was working with the shipwreck crew, not diving, just talking to them about what they were bringing up and what that meant for the passengers. And I was able to weave that into the book. That's what it's about.
Wow.
It has a modern day storyline too, because of the shipwreck hunters. So there is a museum curator in the modern day storyline who is curating the exhibit.
Oh, wow. That sounds fabulous. And already can see that it's involving so much research into the actual.
Well, there was scant evidence out there about it. That was, and I half joking because I would have written it anyway, but I don't know if I would have written it if I had known how hard I would have to dig. I thought the information would be easier to find than it was, but I found some really fascinating stories, and the family I follow, it's incredible what happened to them and who they became. And that's all I'm going to say.
I can't wait to read it. And to our readers, it is available for pre-order. So please pre-order it if you haven't already.
Click.
That's right. Coming in March 2021. Well, Patti, I want to thank you so much for spending your hour with the book club tonight.
Thank you
It's
for
just
having
been
me.
such a privilege, and your posts over the past month have just piqued our interest even more. So thank you
Yes.
for
Thank you.
giving us all of those incredible resources to, investigate and find out more.
I'm so glad. And I'm so grateful to all of you. This book club is such a gift. And I'm so happy that you're running it and that we all get to come see you. And I love seeing the other authors come in and talk. This is a super treat. So thanks, y'all. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be sure to tune in for our readers who are listening.
And
Be
I'll run by the page.
I'm sorry?
Wait, I'll run by the page and see if there's any questions I didn't answer over the next couple days. So if you didn't get your question answered, I'll run by and check and see if you didn't get your question answered.
Fabulous. Thank you.
That's great,
And on behalf of the main Friends in Fiction page, I want to say be sure to tune in Wednesday night when the authors chat with Elizabeth Berg. So we're very excited about that.
So much.
And
Yeah.
remember, you can grab any of the authors' books this week at the featured bookstore, the Book Table in Oak Park, Illinois. And we will post the website link, and you use the coupon code Friends and Fic for a 10% discount. Our next book discussion will be Monday, November 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern, where we'll talk about Feels Like Falling with Christy Woodson Harvey. So we'll see you all then. And thanks again, Patti, for a wonderful evening.
Thank you both of you.
Thank you, Patti.
And thank you all the Friends in Fiction Book Club who showed up. I can't wait to go read what you said on the page. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next time. I never